Welcome to Fireside Giants. Oh, wait, I forgot to do the other one. Hold on. 3, 2, 1. What's up, everybody? My name is Alex Wilson, and I have my co-host beside me, Anthony Rivaro from Fireside Giants and Empire Sports Media Production. You're listening to the Fireside Giants podcast, my friends. If you are a die-hard Giants fan, you've come to the right place. Daily episodes, interviews, draft content, and so much more. Make sure to drop a like and a subscription below on YouTube. And don't forget to leave a comment. We love to engage with everybody. Now, today's episode, centering around some Kansas City Chiefs free agents. We've taken a look at some Buffalo Bills guys and, where Joe Shea might be able to connect with some familiar faces. Isaiah McKenzie, Mitch Trubisky is two guys that really stand out as potential acquisitions for the Giants. They've already brought on a couple practice squad guys and signed them to future deals from Buffalo. But let's take a look at the Kansas City Chiefs. They have a couple of really nice pieces hitting free agency who won't be pricey and could be effective players for the Giants and help bring over a more prominent system and scheme that can help us kind of, evolve our offense. But Anthony, before we dive into the good stuff, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing great, and I think it's exciting to take a look at these free agent players that have connections to our coaching staff because, as we know, typically around the NFL, anytime you see, an offensive coordinator get hired here, a defensive coordinator hired here, a head coach here, what they do is they like to look at guys that they're familiar with, players that they know will fit into their schemes, players that they know will fit into their culture in the locker room. So with these guys that we're going to mention here on the Chiefs, I mean, this is a perfect connection to Mike Kafka, our new offensive coordinator. So he might go out there, he might say to Joe Shane, like, hey, listen, there's a couple of these players that are on the open market. I worked with them in Kansas City. I'd like to continue working with them. If you guys can go ahead and sign them, that would be awesome. So that's kind of the idea here. And so we've already done a couple for the Bills. Now we're going to do some for the Chiefs. We probably should get around to doing some for the Ravens as well. Wink Martindale coming over for Baltimore. I can almost guarantee that the Giants will sign at least 1 to 2 former Chiefs players, former Bills players, and former Ravens players just to get these guys that fit underneath these coaching staffs or the new coaching staff and fit into the schemes of these new coordinators. And I think it's going to be really exciting to see what the Giants do in free agency. Free agency is, under a month away now at this point. So got all the news covered here on Fireside Giants.
That is obviously true. All your news covered here. And today, right now, I want to look at Byron Pringle. Byron Pringle is an interesting player. He had 5 times as many touchdowns as both Kenny Golladay and Kadarius Toney combined. But, looking at him, he's kind of on the 4th pecking order in the Chiefs offense, right? It's probably like Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, and then maybe Byron Pringle, right? That's kind of how you look at it in terms of their hierarchy of players and playmakers. Byron Pringle's a solid player, 28 years old, 3rd year in the NFL, going into his 4th season next year. He had 568 yards and 5 touchdowns and a 70% catch rate this past year with Kansas City. He knows what a winning team looks like. He knows what a winning offense looks like. He knows how he's supposed to operate and play. And when you have so many great playmakers drawing so much attention, it opens up opportunities for your lesser-known guys. And that's kind of where Byron Pringle really thrived. He was forgotten about. Team's 2nd, 3rd corners were on him, and they just couldn't stop him because he's a good player. And pairing him with Kadarius Toney, Kenny Golladay, if Saquon Barkley stays, and then let's say you draft another receiver in the mid-rounds. You took a look at Skye Moore from Western Michigan the other day. Really, really nice player. Maybe they can go with someone like that and have a couple of nice playmakers there. He would be a pretty solid fit, and he's not going to be a pricey free agent by any means. I mean, you're looking at a multi-year deal, 2-3 years, and maybe, 3 years. What would you say? Maybe 3 years, $20 million. Is that reasonable?
For Byron Pringle?
Maybe less?
That's way less, for sure.
Way less,
definitely
you think?
less. Oh, yeah,
He's a good player.
Pringle's a decent depth player. Like, he's not even a starter on Kansas City. He was their 3rd receiving option. He's dealt with injuries in the past. I can't see him getting nearly that much money. From everything that I've read, I'm seeing 1 year, 2 year deals that are worth under $5 million in total. So okay. I think that this is definitely going to be a way more affordable option. Byron Pringle being, a guy that can contribute both as a receiver and he can contribute on special teams, but he's got his fair share of problems that we'll get into once we really start to discuss him. But in terms of a contract outlook, I don't think it would be anything long-term. He is 28 years old. He's, kind of getting to that stage. And he also has never been a featured receiver in any offense. He's an undrafted free agent in 2018. He spent 4 years with the Chiefs. And now if he does leave, which isn't even likely, honestly, because the Chiefs are known to kind of keep their in-house guys in-house. But if he does go ahead and leave Kansas City, makes sense if he goes to the Giants because he's got familiarity with Mike Kafka. Could be similar offensive principles over there. But if he does leave, I don't see him getting any kind of big payday. He's not like some weapon or force for an offense. He's just a really solid depth piece, which is what the Giants are going to need once they go ahead and start cutting guys, particularly Sterling Shepard could be on the chopping block. So you kind of need to get some depth in there, get a solid player that can go out there and start some games. So I think it would be a really low cost option in Byron Pringle. If I remember correctly, I think that his projected contract from one of the articles that I read was like 1 year, $3 million. So it's definitely more affordable than you initially thought.
Okay. So if you're looking at $3 to $4 million, 2 years, $6 million deal, 2 years, $7 or $8 million deal, that's reasonable. The Giants can sustain that type of contract. Byron Pringle, though, Mike Kafka helping with the passing game coordinator. He was really, really influential in that Chiefs offense, of course, behind Reed and Ben-Ami, but he was probably more or less helping develop a game plan. He wasn't altogether calling plays or really having any impact on that side. He was just helping develop the passing game for that team. So we know that Byron Pringle has definitely played a part in his coordinating abilities and where he was there, which stands out. It's just a connection, right? Every single time the Giants have turned over a coaching staff, we've seen them go out and get players who they have familiarity with, right? From James Bettcher and Antoine Bethea, Kyler Fackrell with Green Bay, and Patrick Graham when he first came here. So there's a lot of different guys the Giants have brought over in the past. And I think for the most part, Byron Pringle makes a lot of sense for the Giants. He's not going to be expensive. He's a playmaker. He's fast. He's athletic. And the Chiefs' mold is they want speed, right? Their entire offensive mold is predicated on speed and being able to separate. Byron Pringle does those things pretty well. So I think that he's a good option. 5 touchdowns last year definitely stands out to me as a really solid number. We need guys who find ways to get into the end zone. Seems like he's capable of doing that, Anthony. And I know you said there's a couple things regarding him that are a little bit of negatives, but what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, so he does have somewhat of an issue with the drops. Let me go ahead and pull up the exact numbers here. But in terms of this past season, I believe his drop numbers, his percentage of drop targets was at 6.7%, which was second in total on the Kansas City Chiefs, second only behind Travis Kelce, whose target volume is much higher anyway. He played 49% of the team's offensive snaps, which is good, so he's on the field for half of the time, which makes him a really solid wide receiver 3 in the Chiefs offense. But, dropping 4 passes on his targets was a 6.7% drop rate, which is a little bit high. Like, you don't necessarily want over 6%, probably you want around 3%, right? Somewhere in there, sure-handed receivers. But, that's kind of what you expect for a wide receiver 3. This is your third option. It's not like he was their number 1 option. If your number 1 option is dropping passes frequently, then you have an issue. But for your number 3 receiver, which is probably what he would fit in as for the Giants offense as well, because you're talking Kenny Golladay number 1, then number 2 probably Tony or Darius Slayton. So Pringle is going to be the 3rd, 4th, or 5th option on the Giants anyway if they go ahead and sign him. I mean, he's great depth at that price tag, but if he's dropping a few passes here and there, it's like it could be killer. But it's not like he's the number 1 receiver on your team. So, yes, the 6.7 drop percentage is a little bit concerning. And then also the injury history. He finished the 2020 season with 13 receptions for 160 yards and 1 touchdown, but he did miss 3 total games with an ankle injury. So he does have at least some career history dealing with an injury, which I know might scare some Giants fans because we said Kenny Golladay had a career history dealing with an injury but came back strong. And then, of course, he just got injured right away once again. Kadarius Toney's dealt with injury. Sterling Shepard's dealt with injury. Darius Slayton's dealt with injury. All of our wide receivers have dealt with injury. So I would understand if Giants fans took a look at Byron Pringle, saw, he missed some time with an ankle injury last season. Granted, it was only 3 games, but he did miss time. And I believe in his 2018 undrafted rookie season, he spent that entire year on injured reserve as well. So he has had 2 injuries in his career that might scare away some Giants fans, but I think you take a look at the price. If those are the only 2 drawbacks, the fact that he's had some injuries in the past, even though he was completely healthy for all of 2021, and then also some dropped passes throughout 2021. I mean, if those are the only 2 drawbacks, considering the production that he had in the 2021-22 postseason, plus the solid career trajectory that he's been on, I definitely think the benefits outweigh the drawbacks, and I think that there's a lot to like about Byron Pringle.
Yeah, I mean, look at Darius Slayton, man. The guy has like an 18% drop rate. He only has a 10% drop rate last season. So it's like you look at the difference and say, okay, they're 2 different players. They both have some drop issues. But I also say this, Byron Pringle played a lot in the slot, which is something that entices me as well, especially if they're going to cut Sterling Shepard. You can go out and get a guy like Byron Pringle. He has a lot of experience in the slot. He can go out wide too. He can do a lot of different things. You can use him in motion. And that's kind of what I like about where the Giants can go with this offense. If you get receivers who have that speed and can get across the formation quickly in motion and really draw defenders out of place. Kenny Galladay's not going in motion that often. He's not that fast, right? He's not going to be the type of guy you want to be setting in motion. You're going to see Kadarius Toney, guys like Byron Pringle, guys like Skye Moore. Those are the ones you want to see coming across the line of scrimmage in motion because they can do other things as well. They can take those jet sweeps. They can do stuff in the open field with their speed and agility. So Byron Pringle in that regard does stand out to me. But like you said, the drops might even drive his price down. So that might be a benefit for the Giants if they're looking for cheaper options.
Yeah, and I'll say, though, one thing that might drive his price up is Byron Pringle's performance in the postseason. So if you take a look at his postseason stats, like you saw a real increase in playing time for whatever reason, like the wild card game versus the Pittsburgh Steelers that the Chiefs won 42-21, right? He had 7 targets in that game, which is kind of a lot, but he caught 5 of those targets and he scored 2 touchdowns. Now, he only had 37 total yards, so he was used as a short range receiver, which is a little surprising because usually in the regular season, his usage has been more of a long range receiver where he's kind of using his speed to get vertical downfield. But for that game against the Steelers, they were kind of using him in the short to intermediate area, catch and run style, which I kind of like a lot because he's got that ability to catch a pass and then, go for extra yards after the catch. And then in the second playoff game versus Buffalo, they won that 42-36. He also had 7 targets and 5 receptions, so same numbers there, but he only had 29 receiving yards, which is even less. And he had 1 touchdown. But that's pretty cool to see that he scored 3 touchdowns in the postseason. He didn't score 1 in their final postseason game. He only caught 2 passes for 16 yards against the Bengals, but he did have a really solid postseason run there where teams could have seen that and said, hey, Byron Pringle maybe isn't fully utilizing this Chiefs offense because they have so many great talented players in that offense, but he is a solid contributor. And when he needs to make a play, he has the ability to do so. And more often than not, he goes ahead and he makes that play. So that's kind of what he demonstrated in the postseason. And I think that's important, especially when you're looking at it from the Giants' perspective. You're talking about having depth players that you can rely on, right? Not a guy like a Colin Johnson who might have 1 or 2 games, get hurt, and then he kind of disappears for the rest of the year, right? Now, I like Colin Johnson, and he did have some solid contributions, but Byron Pringle is a player that contributes to the Chiefs' offense pretty much every single game. Every single week, he's out there making a contribution in one way or another. Now, he's not game-wrecking, he's not earth-shattering performances out of Byron Pringle every week, but he's making solid contributions, and he is a really solid, reliable receiver in the Chiefs offense. And if the Giants were to go ahead and sign him again, he'd be their 3rd, 4th, or 5th option in that offense, but he'd be a really solid 4th or 5th option, like a really solid even 3rd option, in my opinion, because he's been a 3rd option in the Chiefs' loaded offense. So he can definitely be a 3rd option in the Giants offense without a doubt.
Absolutely. And, when we're looking at the next guy we're going to talk about, Andrew Wylie, offensive lineman for the Chiefs, both him and Pringle are undrafted free agents. What I'm noticing here is that Kansas City's really good at finding value
yes, they are.
Beyond the draft, which is pretty impressive. Andrew Wylie, undrafted free agent back in 2017. He spent his time with Eastern Michigan, the Eagles. So this is an interesting player, 27 and a half years old. He is cool. I like him because he reminds me of Nick Gates in one way. Very, very versatile. Nick Gates could play center. He could play right tackle. He could play guard at an average level. And that's really what you like in a player. If you can supplement injuries that way, you have, let's say you have depth at right tackle, but you have no depth at guard. And, you have Andrew Wylie who can play both. You move him over to guard. And I like that versatility, and that value is really is tremendous for a team like the Giants who don't have much talent there. And he's at a really price-efficient contract, right? You're looking at a player that might be getting a 2 to 3 year deal, maybe getting paid $4 million per season, $5 million per season max. So that's something the Giants can afford. And I'll tell you what I like about Andrew Wylie. 6'6", 309 pounds, he's a big guy. He spent all of last season playing right tackle for Kansas City, 521 snaps. So they had a couple players there, but he played pretty well. He's a really good run blocker. I wouldn't say really good. He's a good enough run blocker. He's a pretty average pass blocker, which is better than Nate Solder by 100 miles. He played right guard in 2020 for the Chiefs, 874 snaps there. And he played 574 snaps at left guard in 2019 with the Chiefs. His best year came at left guard. So that's an interesting thing to point out. Maybe what the Giants could do is sign him and say, let's try him out at a couple different spots during training camp and see where he kind of takes, see where he fits. Worst case scenario, you have a fantastic reserve guy. And the Giants can't solve every offensive line position this year. It's going to be really difficult to do that. They can try, but it's going to be difficult. You need guys like this who maybe you have on a 2 or 3 year contract who can start this year at a position, and then the Giants can say, hey, next year we'll get an upgrade, and then we'll kick him to a reserve spot, and he can fill any position that we need him to, barring, if injury hits or whatever reason. The Giants had no depth this year. Half of them retired right before the season. So I kind of like Andrew Wylie because of the flexibility and value he offers in terms of being able to play multiple positions, and just see where he sticks. The Giants are probably going to draft a right tackle. They're probably going to draft a guard. They have Shane Lemieux, who I don't trust at all. But Andrew Wylie can come in here and compete, and really he can give you average play at multiple spots, which is, I think, super beneficial. Anthony, what do you think about a guy like Andrew Wylie and the connection he has with Mike Kafka already?
Yeah, I think the connection obviously makes it make sense, right? You see a Chiefs player, you see a Chiefs assistant, like combining on another team, that makes sense. But what makes more sense for Andrew Wylie is a positional versatility that you mentioned. The fact that he played right tackle this past season, I believe the season before that he was playing right guard, and the season before that he was playing left guard. Yeah, it is reminiscent of Nick Gates because he started off as right tackle, then moved to guard, then left guard, then center. He's been all across the line. The only position that Nick Gates hasn't played is left tackle. He's got ultimate versatility because he plays all of those positions at least a decent level. And that's kind of what Andrew Wylie does as well. And now, granted, I think his best season was this past one that he played at right tackle. Right guard, from what I looked at it with the metrics, wasn't the best season. The left guard season was pretty good as well. So he definitely has the ability to move across the offensive line and just play at least an average to above level. And that's exactly what the Giants need, because they have players playing at right tackle, right guard, center, left guard who are well below average. So the increase that you get from getting a below average offensive lineman to just an average offensive lineman, I mean, the increased performance is huge. It makes a major difference in an NFL offense to have from below average offensive line play to just average offensive line play. Like, that could be the difference between 3 of your games on your schedule legitimately. That could win you 3 games just to have an average offensive line. So that's really important to get to that standard, right? Because if they sign Andrew Wylie, if it's a low cost deal, super low budget move to go get Andrew Wylie in free agency, right? They draft him. They peg him in as the starter at, let's say, right guard, right? And then they go ahead and they draft Zion Johnson, who's, playing right guard for them as a starter in the next season. Well, then you can either take him, Andrew Wylie, move him to right tackle, and he could be your starter there if you failed to plug that position in the draft. Or you can even move him to left guard if you failed to plug that position in the draft, right? You just get that positional versatility that's really important there, so that no matter what you do in free agency or the draft, a guy like Andrew Wylie will find a place to play on this team. He'll find a position to stick to, right? So even if you sign him to do one thing, plans might change and he can move over and do something else. And I think we've seen that before, right? They signed Nate Solder to be left tackle, and then he moved over to right tackle. Some players have positional flexibility. Nate Solder really did not, because he never performed all that well at right tackle. But some players do have the positional flexibility, like Nick Gates. He was brought in here to be a right tackle, moved to right guard, center, left guard. He pretty much performed everywhere, and he did it all at a pretty decent level. So it's really important to have those guys who have the flexibility, and Andrew Wylie could be that perfect signing where you just pick him up for a low cost, and you say no matter what, you'll have somewhere to play along this offensive line, or at the very least, you can be our backup, our do-it-all guy. If any one of our offensive linemen goes down with an injury, Andrew Wylie, you can go ahead and just plug into any one of those positions that gets injured, and you can go ahead and make a name for yourself out on the open field. So that's what I like most about Andrew Wylie. Statistically, he's decent, he's average, but that's really all the Giants need from a guy like that. A guy who's just plug and play at any position, or could even be a backup for every single position. You just want that kind of player to be average, and I think that's exactly what Andrew Wylie is. So I would really enjoy this sign. I think it would be really smart, especially considering how cheap it would ultimately be.
Exactly. The value. And like we've been saying, Nick Gates, I don't necessarily have all the faith in the world he's going to be able to make an impact this upcoming season. The injury he sustained was significant. That value we lost from his flexibility is significant. We need to replace that value. I think Andrew Wylie would do that and then some, because right off the bat, he's capable of playing both guard spots with experience and tackle. The Giants, and interestingly enough, we need to find a center. I don't trust Billy Price with anything. And Nick Gates, I don't have much faith in right now. I still love him as a player, and I hope that he returns. But I'm not going to put all my chips in the basket right now. We need a center. Who is that going to be? We'll take a look at a couple draft options. There's this draft class at center is pretty weak behind Tyler Linderbaum. I know Zion Johnson was also training at center during the Senior Bowl, but I think left guard is really his strong suit, and I wouldn't want to move him from there. But again, center interesting. I mentioned Ben Jones a couple videos ago from the Tennessee Titans. He could be an option. The Giants need some players. They're going to have to find quality players at a really price efficient, point. And I think that Andrew Wylie offers that at right tackle, left guard, and right guard. He's a really cheap player considering the other options on the market. You know, James McDaniels. Of course, we mentioned. Who else did we mention? Andrew Norwell. There's another guy who we meant. Who did we mention the other day?
I don't recall. We mentioned so many names on this
I
podcast,
know.
but there's a lot of options out there on the offensive line. That's what I do know. There's quite a
Laken
few
Tomlinson.
options. Laken Tomlinson. Yes, I really like that option. That's a really solid option, playing from that Shanahan offense.
A little older.
And he's got a lot of great run blocking abilities. He is someone that I do really like for the Giants in free agency, but he's going to be more expensive than a guy like Andrew Wylie.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. He's 30 years old though, right? So like he may not get the crazy money people think he will because he's a little bit older. But you never know. We'll see. There's definitely going to be some competition, but this year there's some good guards. There's some really underrated guys like Wylie, who I think would fit the mold for the Giants, especially with the familiarity that Mike Kafka has with him. But that really wraps up this episode talking about Byron Pringle and Wylie, two Kansas City Chiefs players preparing to hit free agency who the Giants could see as potential suitors. And I think that the value is there. We've kind of broken it down, given some insight into why we think it makes sense for those guys, and they'll be probably a lot cheaper than others, which I think definitely stands out as a significant factor. But guys, hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to like and subscribe as always, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.